Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP DT1 long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small, typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon, Quest, etc. would call in and say DT1 lines were down or outages. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I can do anything my male counterparts could. It didn't take long, and the customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., an hour lunch, and after 6 p.m., I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, schoolwork, and writing done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda, go get food, and so on. One time while I was up away from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door. But nothing else to really make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much because the back of the building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times I felt like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So, one night I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and I needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quick. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease, and everything told me to turn my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m., and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this popsicle stand. I tried shaking the feelings off and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there. But as I made the full turn, I saw once again nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back up to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator. I went to the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place, then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs. Once I was back at my desk, I sunk down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise. I was in a building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over again in my head that it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere I got that feeling of someone watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty man. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflecting of the lights inside. I dropped back down into my cubicle before he could catch sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I have ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m., There was no good reason why he is checking out my office. As I sit in my chair, I hear the door shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors. They didn't budge, to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked onto mine, he started to bang harder and smack the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass doors to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. Yes, my name is Samantha and I work at Spectrum IT Services building. I need someone to come out. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. I knew that he wouldn't just walk off, not with how hard he was banging. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock came out of nowhere and smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what just happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against the glass door. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was now. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over my wall and saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I have read many stories like this before, and people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough, and they aren't kidding. It feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. Another smash against the door, but along with that, the sound of glass breaking. Sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red-blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of the entryway. One officer came to the front door and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw happen. Soon, my boss arrived and checked on me and then the damage. At some point, my husband was called and I told him I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off and started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with an ex-coworker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of the provisioner. From smartphones to Blackberries, when they were still worth buying, plus VoIP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all of the funds that were worth something. So, dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again.
I'm a female, and I work as a bartender in the city. This is a job that I've had for 3 years, and I really enjoy it. I live in an apartment building only a few blocks away from the bar that I work at. I've had a couple of scary experiences though. Most of them weren't too bad, but the scariest one was only about a year ago. I usually work until pretty late at night, about 2 or 3 a.m. One night, it was really busy like it typically is at the bar that I work at. The sidewalk out front has lots of people that walk by on it as well. At maybe 1 a.m., there was a man walking by on the sidewalk, and he stopped and looked in the window. From where I am behind the bar, I have a pretty good view out of our large window that we have out front. The guy had on older sunglasses and a hat, but he appeared to be looking right at me. He had stopped and was just standing there looking inside the window. I saw him and thought it was a little weird, but just kept on working. I was really busy and I didn't have time to think about it. As some time went by, I think he left because I didn't notice him anymore. But sometime later, he returned and was once again staring at me through the window. It was a couple of minutes where I wasn't too busy, and I realized how weird this was. I just looked at him, looking at me. He didn't wave or anything. He was just staring at me through the window. He was standing maybe a foot away from it. After about 2 or 3 minutes straight, I watched him walk away. He didn't come inside to the bar at all that I know of. I certainly didn't recognize him, but then again, he was wearing sunglasses and it was dark out, so I didn't get a great look at him. Plus, I met probably thousands of people during my years of bartending. That night, when I got off at almost 3 a.m., I walked home like usual. By now, the streets were almost completely empty despite it being a busy city. They typically were at this hour. It took me maybe 10 minutes to walk to and from work. About halfway back, I was on the sidewalk and I passed by an alley. When I passed it by, I noticed somebody was standing in the alleyway about 50 feet down. It was certainly creepy that anybody would be standing in the middle of a dark alley at that hour. I looked over just out of instinct and noticed that this was the same man. He still had on his weird sunglasses, and they weren't weird in a funny way. They were older and outdated. He was just standing there doing nothing but staring at me as I walked past. I sped up and walked faster. I couldn't believe that I was seeing him again. This was a large city, so many people lived there. I started to wonder if this man somehow knew that I would walk past. I kept my eyes out to see if the man would follow me out of the dark alley. I was nervous and felt around for my bottle of mace just to be on the safe side. As I walked away, I noticed that he did not come out of the alley though. I kept looking behind me and was not followed home. When I made it back, I felt relieved. I had never felt that nervous walking home before. I had done so many times at all kinds of late hours too, and nothing that suspicious had ever happened. After I got home, I was really tired. I got ready for bed and then went into my bedroom. My apartment was on the 5th floor, so I was sort of high up. I shut off my lights before getting into bed and also looked out my window. I had a nice view of the city, and I looked around, but then I looked down to the street. On the sidewalk, the man was standing there. He was staring right up at me. I quickly moved away from the window and then covered it with the blinds. I didn't know how this guy knew where I lived, especially which apartment specifically was mine. I was really creeped out. After that, in the days that followed, I felt sort of paranoid. I told several friends and coworkers about it. None of them knew who the man could be, but they were also concerned for my safety. They told me I should consider going to the police, especially if I saw the guy again. But I didn't. For a while, that is. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks went by. I had just forgotten about the whole situation. Then, one night, I had gotten home from work and was getting ready for bed. I was in my bathroom washing my face when I thought I heard a noise coming from the hallway in my apartment right outside my front door. With the water running right next to my head, I couldn't hear very well though. I turned the water off from the sink and listened. Just then is when I heard my front doorknob getting turned, but the door was luckily locked. Then there was a pause for about 30 seconds. That was followed by a knock on my front door. I just knew it was the same guy. I remembered everything, and at this hour, I didn't know who else it could be. I walked over to the door very slowly and quietly. I looked out the peephole, and sure enough, it was him. He was standing right outside my door. I wondered how he had gotten in the building. I very quietly walked into my bedroom. As I made it in the doorway, he knocked again. When I got inside of my bedroom, I went into the closet and dialed 911. I was as quiet as I could be while doing so. I explained what was going on and said that I felt that I was in danger. I was told that an officer would be there shortly. In the meantime, I was really hoping that the man wouldn't try to break in or anything. I carefully walked back to the doorway of my bedroom and listened. I heard the man trying to open the door once more, and then he knocked again. After that, there was no sounds for a good 2 or 3 minutes. I thought maybe he was gone, so I walked back over to the door and looked out the peephole again. He was still there, standing right there on the other side. Just remembering seeing the guy through the peephole right on the other side gives me the creeps. I quietly went back into my bedroom. I waited there, and a short time later, I heard multiple voices outside my door in the hallway. I walked over and looked out again. I saw the man talking with a police officer, and they walked away down the hallway. A short time after that, a police officer knocked on my front door to talk to me. Apparently, the man made up a story that he thought I had dropped some money on the ground when walking home, and he was trying to return it to me. Obviously, that was a total lie. I hadn't dropped any money. After that, I never saw the man again though. I don't know how exactly he found out where I lived. other than that he must have followed me home before without me knowing. He must have also watched my building to see me at my window before I noticed him. It's all really creepy to think about. I've worked several different jobs before finding my current career, which I love. One of those jobs was working for a cleaning company. We were a company that would go to different businesses in the area, mostly office buildings, and clean them. Sometimes there would be multiple employees sent to clean. Other times, it was just one of us. I remember that there was this one office building in particular that I was sent to clean. I worked late nights, and I enjoyed the night shifts. Going to and from work, there would be no traffic, and it was nice to be able to get my work done and leave pretty easily. However, this is not something that I would enjoy doing for a long period of time, but it was nice for a while. In this one office building, when I got there, I would be the only person in the entire building. It wasn't that big, but they did have 3 floors. There was a checklist of all the things that I needed to get done, and then I could leave. I was given access to the building, and I remember that when I first got inside, I saw that all the lights were off. I started on the first floor, and the things I needed to do were clean the floors by vacuuming, cleaning the bathrooms, and disinfect and clean a couple of other areas. It would probably take me only about 2 hours. After I finished up the first floor, I moved up to the second. Probably about 20 minutes into working on the second floor, I was vacuuming when I thought I heard the elevator. I paused and turned off the vacuum for a second. The elevator was in fact moving, and it was going up to the 3rd floor. I was only like 30 feet away from it, and suddenly I felt a little worried. I knew for a fact that nobody else was supposed to be here. After thinking about it a little, I wasn't sure at all what somebody else would be doing there. If somebody was in fact supposed to be there, I would have been informed about it. I didn't want to investigate, and I just went back to cleaning. I finished vacuuming and then cleaned the bathrooms on that floor. When I moved out to clean a window of one of the office areas, I heard a noise from the floor that I was in. My heart started racing. I tried telling myself to not be scared about it. I couldn't see to the area directly where the noises were coming from. I kept working and didn't hear anything else for several minutes, but then I heard some noises again. By this point, it was all I could think about, even as I worked. I decided to walk over to where the noises were coming from. Maybe there was a logical explanation. I walked over and at first saw nothing, but then I heard a noise again really suddenly. It sounded much closer and louder than what I had heard before. I then saw a man running from behind one wall and go down a hallway briefly before going into the stairwell. I saw him for a total of maybe 3 seconds. I didn't get a good look at him at all, but I had a feeling that he wasn't supposed to be in here. How he got in, I had no idea. I walked over to the stairwell, and when I got there, I opened up the door. I didn't hear any noise when I did. When I looked inside, I didn't see anybody either. The man must have gone up a flight of stairs or down a flight of stairs. I didn't think that he had enough time to be on another floor yet, though. I felt like he was still inside there. I yelled, asking who he was. He didn't respond. I then yelled that nobody was supposed to be in this building, and he had to leave now or else I was going to call the police. Right after I said this, I heard a door open and then shut. It was coming from down on the first level. While the man hadn't answered me, I figured that because he was on the first floor now, he was leaving. I waited in the stairwell listening for a couple of minutes before going back to the second floor and finishing up my work there. It didn't take me long to finish there before I moved up to the 3rd floor to clean that level. I got up there and did the same routine I had for the previous 2 floors. They were all pretty similar. I didn't hear any noises and things were going well. Sure, I was still going to have to report that somebody had been in the building, but I really thought that the man had left. Just when I was about finished with the 3rd floor, I was in one of the hallways when I suddenly heard footsteps. They were coming from behind me. I had absolutely no idea how the man was back up here. The footsteps behind me were quickly approaching. When they were maybe 20 feet back, I turned around. I saw just enough of the man for a second before I turned back and ran for the stairs. I knew I had no chance to make it to the elevator. When I got to the stairs, I sprinted down as fast as I could. I heard the man running down the stairs behind me. He was about 1 flight of stairs behind, so I couldn't see him. I was running as fast as I possibly could. At last, I made it to the 1st floor and sprinted out for the front doorway. I made it outside and ran to my vehicle, which was a work truck. I got inside, but some of my equipment was still inside the building. I called the police and my boss. I waited in my truck in the parking lot until the police got there. When they did, they went inside and actually came out with the man about 10 minutes later. I'm really glad that they caught him. After talking with police and my boss, I was able to go in and get my stuff and then leave. This was a pretty scary experience for me though. I've thought about what would have happened if the man had caught up with me when he was walking up from behind. Would he have tried to hurt me? The fact that he chased after me makes me think yes. I'm just really glad that I got away.
I'm currently away from school on a co-op rotation with a major company. My company is headquartered in a larger city, and I'm working in a smaller site just north of HQ. I live in a small township in the suburbs, a gated apartment complex in a very nice area with very low crime rates. I woke up and got ready for work like normal. When I got in my car, not only was it basically frozen over, but I noticed that I was low on gas. I decided not to risk it and fill up before work. Once my front and back windows defrosted just enough for me to see, I drove a block down the road to my usual fill-up spot. I pull up to the farthest right pump and hop out of the car. As I'm swiping my card and doing all that fun stuff, another car then pulls up. I didn't get a real good look at it honestly, but it wasn't shiny or new. I barely paid any attention until the car stopped at the pump on the other side of my own. I could hear the other driver swiping their card and entering their PIN number. I was freezing cold and just trying to hurry. I turned around and put the nozzle in the car, and I just stood there for a minute. Very foolishly, I decided to keep my back turned. I didn't want to have any contact with that person, so I just tried to pretend that nobody was there. Once I filled up, I removed the nozzle and then turned around, still keeping to myself and not even lifting my eyes. I finished the transaction and got my receipt. While it was printing, I looked up casually. I almost fell flat on the pavement when I saw a man peering around the corner of the pump just staring at me. His eyes were just really cold and unyielding. He wasn't blinking or moving, but his gaze was growing even more intense. There was something animalistic in the way he stared at me. I felt like a deer being watched by a mountain lion. The hairs on the back of my neck stood. My instincts were screaming at me to run. This all took place in the span of just a couple seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I very quickly opened my car door. When I did so, the man moved his head, tilting it to the side to peer into my car. I didn't really consider it at the time, but I think he might have been looking to see if I was alone. I intentionally blocked the view of the inside of my car with my body and then closed the door very quickly. I then locked it immediately. So, you know how earlier I mentioned that my car was nearly frozen over? Well, by now the front and back windows were entirely clear. The side windows, however, were almost still all icy. There was a single strip of clarity in the driver's side window, a result of me rolling the window down a few moments prior in an attempt to clear it off. As I hastily buckled my seatbelt, I ventured a glance to my left. The man was still there, still staring, but he had now inched closer. I could see more of his body now than before. He was tall with dark hair and a well-built frame. He was certainly much larger than me. He seemed a few years older than me. Had it not been for those eyes, I might have even said that he was attractive. But those eyes, they were just haunting. I decided to do the logical thing and get myself the hell out of there as fast as possible. I didn't want to chance him being able to follow me. Though my work has really great security, I didn't want him knowing where I worked. I don't really know if this man was just a creep or maybe something much darker, but I don't want to find out. Ever.
When I was younger and more inclined to chase paper at literally all hours of the night, I took a side gig as an Uber driver. This was on top of my full-time job in retail. Working a counter and making sales just didn't have the payout that I needed at the time. And I wasn't smart enough to just find a better job or simply negotiate a raise. Instead, I did what so many of our working youth do today and picked up a second job. I lived in this big city, drove a nicer car that I loved zipping around in, so working Uber made a lot of sense in my mind. This was around 10 years ago, so the company had successfully launched and was making waves all over the country. You'd hear about people clearing six-figure salaries, all just from giving people rides around their community. People I'd talked to, just in passing, all told me the same thing. It was easy money that you could make hand over fist. I can't really tell you that it wasn't that. I pulled a decent amount in this little side hustle, but I wasn't doubling my income like I thought I would. It also put me in this new level of exhaustion because I had to sacrifice sleep in order to have more productive Uber shifts. This meant I was going all the time. I'd get off the retail job around 5 p.m., grab a quick bite to eat, and then off to work Uber until about 2 in the morning. Anything after that time, I quickly learned was just riffraff. And this was back when Uber didn't have quite the protocol that it does now. It wasn't unheard of for some pretty wild stuff to happen in the backseat of these cars. Fast forward a little bit, and I'm like 6 months into this new working world. I've gotten the swing of working double shifts, where the higher yield areas are for pickups, and how to make a quick turnaround in both drop-offs and getting back down to the downtown areas. If you took the wrong road, you'd come up on the opposite side, where a lot of commercial and business parks were. You'd have to make these weird loops that took extra time and gas to do so. There was a hospital downtown that I would periodically idle nearby, as it had serious real estate in the form of parking lots. I could just rest here and check my phone, not have to worry about the hustle and bustle of traffic, even catch a few Z's if I needed to. There were also various fast food joints and convenience stores nearby, everything to keep me in the game. Occasionally, I'd drink a Red Bull or something, but it wasn't that often. Alas, I found myself at the end of an exhaustive cycle. I was definitely about to reach my limit. One night, during that red line period, I did my usual routine where I pulled into the hospital while waiting for a client. It was an unusually slow night, and I was expecting lots of passengers, so I didn't really know what to do. I held out that I'd make more money later on in that night, so went and got an energy drink from a vending machine in the lobby. It didn't matter. I plopped back down in the driver's seat, turned on my favorite playlist, and then passed out just right there. I wasn't asleep for very long, but it was a deep, catatonic rest. You know the one. Mouth wide open, drooling, mouth breathing, looking my absolute worst. There is one thing that I dislike more, and that's the feeling of waking up when I shouldn't have been asleep. My brain starts to immediately overcompensate. I can't make any connections despite all the sparks. I can't remember where I am, who I am, what I'm doing. There are times when teachers would catch me sleeping in high school. I'd be so startled when they woke me up. I couldn't even speak proper English. Just make weird noises and get silent, then literally have to remember how to make it all make sense. It was one of those times. I remember kicking myself awake because my head was at this weird, funny angle. I made this kind of groaning sound as I snapped back into the waking world. I was still inside my car. It was still nighttime. Hell, it was the same playlist coming through the speakers. I peeked up at the clock and saw that I was only out for maybe 15 minutes. I took a deep breath through my nose and then settled into the seat. A cat nap was actually perfect, allegedly giving us more energy than a longer nap. I checked my phone and saw that I didn't miss anything, but there was a person that I could swoop up nearby and make a few bucks off. I took another swig of my drink, checked my mirrors, and then went to shift into park. I stopped though. There was something off in my rearview mirror. If I wasn't mistaken, there was a person sitting right behind me in the middle seat. We make eye contact. I whirl around and sure enough, plain as day, there's a man just sitting not 12 inches from me. He gets a little smile across his face and just kind of nods, like he was acknowledging that I'd been asleep. It almost looked like a little hello on his end. I really didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to start screaming at him to get out. Another part of me wanted to put on this front, act real tough, and then the other part of me just wanted to ask what he was doing inside my car. That's when I looked down and saw the Uber app open in his phone. I remember the sticker in my window that I was parked outside of a hospital. This guy probably exited one of these buildings, was wandering to a through street while he booked a ride. Then he just happened to see me. For whatever reason, seeing his phone helped my brain regain just a little coherence. And that put the panic to rest. So I simply said, "Hi, what are you doing in my car?" He didn't respond for a moment, just kind of looked at the floor and then the ceiling, anywhere but directly at me. I gestured to his phone and then continued to talk. "Are you looking for a ride or something?" I asked. He nodded. Okay, he's at least halfway normal. I got on at length for a bit, pulling my seatbelt on. Then I explained to him what I explained to you. I worked 2 jobs, I was tired, and I just happened to fall asleep. I said I'd be happy to give him a ride in exchange for a good review, one that wouldn't say that I was sleeping inside my car. We both shared a laugh on that one. "I'm trying to get downtown," he said. He pointed back Jackson Drive, a main drag through the area. "Where?" I asked. He then gave me these loose directions, but said it was pretty close to an old music venue that had shut down a few years before. I was familiar with that area, so I just started the route. We made a little small talk, mostly about myself and how I'd fallen asleep. This guy's name was Donovan. He said that when he got in the car, he went to speak but saw that I was snoring, so just decided to wait. "Well, I appreciate you not being a weirdo," I said. "I was about to freak out before I saw your Uber app." Then it hits me. This guy and I aren't actually linked up. He never ordered a ride through the app, and I haven't logged picking anyone up. I take a quick glance at him in the rear view and say, "Hey, I just realized this ride isn't registered. Can you find me on the app really quickly?" That's when the guy scoffs, looks out the window and says, "Oh, I'm not paying for this." I laugh, to which he just stays silent. It's getting a little awkward now. I glance into the back real quick, realize the mistake that I've now made. This guy isn't dressed like a professional, no business casual, if you catch my drift. He's filthy, he's got torn up clothes, he's only got one shoe on. His face is dirty and dark from sun exposure. There's this grimy backpack next to him. He's homeless, he has to be. While I was asleep, some drifter hanging around the hospital must have just climbed into my car, thinking he'd be able to sleep in it or something. I noticed it on my second glance though. Donovan is wearing a bracelet, the paper kind that they use in the hospital for discharge. This guy probably OD'd behind a trash can, got Narcaned, and is now getting a free ride back to his crack house. All because I couldn't keep my eyes open. I shake my head, hit my blinker, and then start guiding my car towards the next exit. "Yo, where you going?" he asked from the back. "I told you where we're going." "I'm not driving you across town for free, dude. You're lucky I don't even call the cops," I countered. I took my phone out of the cup holder beside me just to show him that I wasn't messing around. "Yeah," Donovan said. "You're lucky I don't unlace my shoe and strangle you with it." Before I could even blink, I felt his crusty, calloused hands sneak around the headrest and wrap around my throat. Instinctually, I took one hand off the wheel and tried to break his grip, but I couldn't do it. I barely got a finger underneath his palm to create just this little space to breathe. Panic started to set in. As I watched a minute tick by on the clock, I tried to get this guy off of me. I could hear his raspy breath just behind me. The smell coming off his hands and mouth was completely disgusting. This dude definitely hadn't showered in at least a week or more. Then it finally hits me. I had to get him off of me. I check my mirrors and see that I'm alone on this stretch of the highway. I then firmly slam on my brakes. I was belted in, but Donovan behind me wasn't as lucky. He slammed forward, right into my seat, which created a little space in his arms. I yanked with my free hand, broke his grip, and then gunned the car over the shoulder. At this point, Donovan has recovered and is now trying to grab me again, but I'm not letting that happen twice. We're in a bit of a standoff now. I put the car in the park and put the hazards on. I say to hell with it. This has already gone too far. I dial 911, hit the call button, and press the phone to my ear. He starts to trip out, makes a lot more threats, but starts to get out of my car now. That's when I notice he's holding a purse, a pretty nice one at that. He grumbles a little bit, shoulders his backpack in that purse, then steps out into the cool night air. He then proceeds to start walking down the shoulder, down the exit ramp and back into the city. I hear dispatch in my ear and I realize I can't just let this go. I start rattling off everything that just happened to me, where I'm at and where the perp is located. As I'm describing the scene, the dispatcher gets quiet for a second, maybe even mutes me, then comes back with new information just a minute later. She says my report matches an earlier one from that exact hospital that I was parked at. Apparently, old Donovan had been admitted exactly as I figured, and during his stay, he became incoherent, agitated, and realized that he wasn't being supervised. He unhooked himself from the machine, put his clothes back on, then just exited the hospital, but not before stealing a purse out of one of the rooms in his wing. She noticed not long after it went missing and got with hospital security. They got on the cameras. It didn't take very long to see this guy strolling out the front door with that woman's purse in hand. From there, he starts running, as seen on the footage. He was probably paranoid about getting caught now that he'd exited the hospital. He zigzagged through the parking lot for a bit before coming upon my car, which was on and idling. D-Bag Donovan thought he was going to be able to steal my car, up until he saw me sleeping in it. From there, he just snuck into the back and hid from any potential hospital security. Needless to say, Donovan's night went south after he got out of my car. I told dispatch where I was and where he was headed, and then even followed him down the exit ramp. I didn't make it 2 blocks before a cop swooped in, flashed him with the lights and siren, and threw him in a pair of cuffs. The phone that I'd seen in his hand was the woman's phone. He'd found it in her purse. He was trying to figure out how to order an Uber in the event that I didn't wake up. It just happened to be the perfect guys in the moment. I gave a statement to the officers who hauled him off. I suspected he spent a couple of weeks drying out in a jail cell. I probably don't need to say this, but remember to lock your car doors, people. A year before COVID hit, I got hired at a call center way downtown, like inner city. We worked taking calls for a roadside assistance company that will remain anonymous. Although honestly, the last time I looked them up, I couldn't even find a website for them. They may or may not even be in business anymore. Anyway, because of the nature of our industry, our office operated 24 hours a day. It wasn't this big private call center, but just a ground level corner unit in a commercial office block. We shared a building with 10 or 12 other businesses. All of them would operate during normal hours. At 5 p.m., the whole parking lot cleared out, and the only light on would be coming from our place. It had no signage and a keypad on the door for around-the-clock access. We would trade shifts at 4 p.m., midnight, and 9 a.m., usually in 2-man teams, sometimes 3 or 4 throughout the week or on holiday weekends. The overnight shift was typically just one guy, Benji, but holiday weekends, they'd put 2 of us from midnight to 9 a.m. So there we were. I think it was Labor Day weekend, and it's Benji and I, handling the phones on a Friday overnight shift. I didn't ever mind getting these shifts because honestly, I love working with the guy. He was a little older than me and has some of the craziest stories that I've ever heard. He grew up inner city, kind of a criminal, but got cleaned up and was looking to break into the music business. I was into drawing and illustration, and he liked looking at whatever I was working on at the time. We'd just hang out until the sun came up. We'd even troll people on the phone if they were spamming or dodging the line. Looking back now, it was a lot of fun in those dark hours and a lot of daydreaming. One night we ordered Domino's, split a pizza and some Cinesticks. Legendary meal for a couple of call room guys. Little did I know in my early 20s that I was slowly becoming lactose intolerant, so all of that cheese and butter would send my stomach and my colon into hysterics. We ate around midnight, talked, and then worked until about 1:30 a.m. And then I started catching the gurgles. By 2 a.m., I knew something was about to happen, out of one end or the other. I clued Benji into what was going on so he could watch the phone line for me. I slipped out the door, which was the only way in and out of the office. There was no secondary escape, no back door, just a big panel window in the back. In hindsight, the office almost seemed illegal. Lots of things within the operation were just shady as hell. As you can imagine, because there's so many office units, we also share a single pair of bathrooms. They were on the ground floor, and they were external, as in the doors were open to the public. Everyone who worked there had a key to either open one door or the other. They were all the way down one of these stretch of businesses, about 40 feet, and then around a corner and tucked into a little back nook of a second floor. This kept them out of sight so no randoms or weirdos tried to use them and or vandalize them. I go in, struggling with my unbeknownst to me digestive issues, and then wash up. As I'm looking into the mirror, I hear someone push on the door from the outside. I laugh and yell something out, as I assumed it was Benji just messing with me. There was no response except for a couple of hard whacks against the metal. Weird, but I had been in there forever, so again, I think Benji is just being funny. I open the door. There's no one there. I step out and wander down the little hallway, but instead of continuing on to the office, I hook left and go out to a small secondary parking lot. It's out in the back. It's where the dumpsters are, as well as this little outdoor area. As I step into the parking lot, I hear feet slapping the asphalt, running at me from some direction. Now I know something weird is going on. I turn and bolt back for the office. I'm sprinting and about to fall face first into the cement, but catch myself on the handle just in time. I start to punch in the code and immediately get it wrong. It's flashing red. I have to wait 5 seconds for it to reset. All I can hear is my heart, my breathing, and these flapping feet out there in the dark. I jiggle the handle and scream for Benji. I'm banging on the door. Suddenly I realize I've switched positions. Now it's me outside being the scary, chaotic thing, and I can see him through the blinds looking over his shoulder. He's on the phone, which is flashing red on 3 ports. It apparently picked up while I was handling my business. I turn and start banging on the glass, begging him to get up. I see him hit the hold button, swing the chair around and rush over to the door. He pushes it open, I spill in, and he slams it right shut again. Breathless, I tell him what had just happened to me. I'm expecting Benji to freak out, lock the extra bolt on the door, and tell me to call the police. Nope, the exact opposite happened. He rolls up his sleeves and steps out into the cool night air. The person was lurking around at the end of the building, where it turned for the bathroom nook. They were barefoot, drug-addled, your average homeless fella in our city. I watched from the threshold of the office door as Benji pigeon-chested this guy and gave him the stern "get the hell out of here" stick. And sure enough, got the guy to tuck tail and run. What I perceived as a serial killer, Benji immediately pegged for just a hobo tweaker. Like I said, he was a hard-ass inner-city dude. He had a colorful history, bit of a rap sheet. I was very grateful to have him by my side every time I went down in that office. We ran into that lurking creep a few more times, and honestly, had all kinds of crazy experiences while working there. There was a 7-Eleven right across the street that would get robbed, roadside calls where people were shot, even one of our drivers, and also a time we helped a guy escape a cult compound by towing his car off of their property. I've never told these stories online, so if anyone is interested in them, just leave me a comment. Cheers.
So I've done a lot of driving for a few years now for many different reasons. Sometimes I drive to work and sometimes just to hang out with friends on the weekends. Being 25 years old, of course, I would most of the time go out partying on the weekends, which resulted in me having to drive places. The places I'd go to were mainly bars and clubs, so sometimes I'd end up driving really long distances for that. It was a weekend night, and I was driving home from one of my college friends' parties when I realized that I was low on gas. To be honest, I debated whether to get gas now or wait until tomorrow, but I knew that I'd probably forget. I pulled into one of my local gas stations down the road and filled up my car with a full tank. As I pay, waiting for my car to fill up, I noticed that it's relatively quiet around. This was strange, as this gas station was pretty popular with it being on the corner, especially for a weekend night. Once my car had been filled up, I go inside just to grab a quick snack when I notice a gas station attendant behind the counter. I give him a quick wave and go get a snack where I then bring it to the counter. Right away, I could almost tell that there was something off about this attendant. He didn't look like someone who would work at a gas station at all. What I mean by that is that in my city, gas station employees were required to wear uniforms. This guy wore a black hoodie and some sweatpants. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I tell him it was just the snack I wanted. Right away he said $2, not even scanning the item to be sure. I pull out $2 from my wallet and hand it to him, where he just pockets the money. Confused, I tell him to have a nice night while walking out when I hear someone scream, "Help me." That's when I turned to look at the attendant, where he's now pointing a gun at me, telling me to ignore that. Without hesitation, I basically storm out of the gas station, put the pump back, and floor it. All the while, I'm on the phone with the police, explaining what had happened and what gas station I had left from. As it turns out, police ended up going over, but unfortunately, the so-called attendant I saw was long gone. The actual attendant had been tied up behind one of the dumpsters, who was the one I heard screaming for help. He had been shot in the leg and hit in the head with a pipe, leaving him unconscious. This explains why I saw the other man with a gun. God only knows what would have happened had I confronted him or called the police then. However, I have the personality of a wimp at times, so I wasn't about to take him on or do anything stupid. A few weeks later, a couple's car got stolen while getting gas from another station from the next town over. They never got it back, even while looking for it. I'm still not sure if it was the same guy or not, as crime is slightly high around where I live. What I encountered was possibly one of the worst, if not the worst incident around where I live. That gas station had been closed for a good week or so before reopening again. It's been months now, and I'm still not sure if police managed to find whoever did this or if he's still out there. The description I gave wasn't as great, seeing as he had on a hoodie while also wearing a mask. This just goes to show you that even the most innocent places can be dangerous, especially at night. Nowadays, I always carry a pocket knife with me whenever I go out at night, just in case. Me nor my family go to that gas station anymore, due to the sheer paranoia of what happened.
This is a story that was told to me by my aunt that gave me the chills. Back in the 90s when she was in college, she worked at Burger King for one summer. She told me that one night, when she was at work, it was a really quiet night and it was pretty late, so it was just her and a few other employees working at the time. My aunt needed to go back to a storage closet they had to get something, but when she opened the door, she saw a man sitting inside the closet. She screamed and ran away to get another worker. When they both came back to the closet and opened it, the man was gone. They had no idea how he could have gotten out without being seen. Then, a few weeks later, while working another late-night shift, my aunt was by herself working the cash register. The restaurant was completely empty, except for a man sitting by himself in the corner. After a few minutes and getting several looks at him, my aunt recognized him to be the same man that was hiding in the closet from before. She wasn't sure what to do. The man was just sitting there in the corner by himself. He didn't order anything, and he wasn't really doing anything either. He was just sitting there. She couldn't help but feel a little bit nervous. My aunt ended up going back to tell one of her coworkers who she was friends with. But when they both came back, once again, the man was gone. It was a weird experience, and my aunt only worked at the Burger King for that one summer. Not long after, she quit working there, but she learned about the history of that Burger King from her friend later on. It used to be a different restaurant, but that restaurant was closed after a man had died inside the restaurant in a robbery. When she saw the man's photo, he looked exactly like the one she had seen. The restaurant was abandoned for about a year before Burger King took it over 5 years before my aunt worked there. It's a pretty creepy story. I work at McDonald's, as I'm a high school student and just turned 16, so it's a decent first job for me. About a month ago, I was working in the drive-thru taking people's orders. It was a Friday night, and things were finally quieting down at about 10 p.m. A car pulled up to the drive-thru and I began to take their order. After I spoke and asked them what they would like, they didn't respond. It was just silence for a few seconds. I repeated myself. The person responded by saying my name. And not just my first name, but my full name. First, middle, and last. I realized it must be someone that I knew, but I didn't recognize the voice or the person. I was confused. I asked who it was. They didn't answer. They just repeated my name one more time. They then drove off. It was a man wearing sunglasses. I didn't recognize him at all. I was pretty spooked for the rest of my shift. After I got off, I went home and told my parents. They were just as confused as I was. To this day, I don't know who it was, and every time I think about it, it creeps me out. This happened almost 3 years ago now. I was driving back with my friend from college. It was kind of late at night, and we were both super hungry. We saw an exit and took it. When we did, we saw that the only open restaurant there was Arby's. Their drive-thru was out of order, so we both walked inside. The place was very quiet, and we appeared to be the only customers. We ordered and then stood by waiting for our food. As we were waiting, we saw the door open and a man walk in. He looked to be middle-aged and was rather tall and large. He had glasses and sort of long hair as well. He walked in slowly and looked at us as he did. Then he walked over and sat down at one of the tables in the restaurant. As we waited, I could feel the eyes of the man locking onto us. My friend and I would both glance over occasionally to see him staring. It was rather uncomfortable. Finally, our food was done, and they gave it to us. We took it and walked out of the restaurant. As we walked out and went back to my car, I noticed the man was parked directly next to us. At least, I assumed that it was the man's car, because there were only 2 other cars in the entire parking lot. Then, I noticed the man exiting the restaurant and walking towards us. He was giving off a really creepy feeling to my friend and I, so we quickly got in my car. We had planned to eat in the parking lot and then drive back, but with the man parked next to us, he got in his car and then began to stare at us once again through the windows of our cars. It was really creepy, so I decided to just drive away. But just as I was afraid of, as soon as I started up my engine, the man started up his as well. And when I started driving away, he followed. I merged back onto the freeway that we had been on before. It was pretty late, so not too many cars were out there besides us. As we started to speed up through the freeway, the guy in the car behind us went from following us to aggressively tailing us. He drove right up to the bumper of my car and followed extremely close. He was so close that I thought he was going to hit the back of my car. I sped up, but at the same time, I knew the potential danger we were in. My heart started to race and I began sweating. The guy behind us then changed lanes and started driving beside us. I slowed down to let him pass. When I did, he slowed down to the same speed. But as his car got next to mine, I looked over and saw him staring at me with a deranged smile on his face. Then he turned his car right towards ours. I had to swerve onto the shoulder of the freeway and slam on my brakes to avoid him hitting me. He ended up swerving too far and then spinning his car out. As it did, he went off the road and his car went down into the ditch. We slowly drove by as we saw him try to drive out of the ditch, but appeared to get stuck. I was relieved and I didn't want to stay there, so I elected to drive away, but as I did, my friend called the police. We explained the situation, and they said they would have people in the area shortly. I was able to make it home safely, thankfully, but it was a close call and something I will never forget. This happened to me about a year ago. I was hanging out with some of my friends from high school. One of them worked at McDonald's, and we stopped by because he wanted to say hi to one of his coworkers. There were 4 of us, and it was about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Our friend went inside, and the 3 of us chilled outside because it was a nice night. I don't think there were any customers at the time, besides us, but after a minute or so we noticed a man riding a 3-wheeled bike around the corner. He had a speaker attached to the back of his bike, which was playing music. We all watched as he rode by us and around the parking lot. He started riding laps around the restaurant. My friends and I thought this was funny and made a couple jokes about it. After about 10 laps, he rode up to us and stopped. He had long hair and a slight beard. He was wearing baggy clothes and appeared to be in his late 20s. He stopped his bike about 5 feet away from us and turned down his music. We all looked at him. "You guys want to know something?" he said. "Sure," I said. He responded with, "I'm about to rob this place." We all looked at each other confused. One of my friends laughed a little. We figured he was joking, but it was kind of a weird thing to say. He just stared at us with a slight grin on his face for a couple seconds. I turned and looked and saw my friend was still talking to his coworker friend at the counter. I kinda wanted to leave. Finally, the man spoke again. "I'd get out of here if I was you guys," he said. "Why's that?" my friend asked. The man said to just leave. My friend said no. I was surprised, but I realized there were 4 of us and 1 of him, and he wasn't any bigger than any of us. The man stood there next to his bike for about 30 seconds just staring at us. Finally, he got back on his bike and rode off. We felt tough for possibly preventing a robbery, as much as we didn't know how serious the man was, or if he was on drugs or something. We all went home, and the next morning I woke up to see my friend post in our group chat a link to a news story. It was about a local bank that had been broken into the previous night. A rock was thrown through the window, and a man was arrested inside. It was the same man. I used to work pretty late nights at one of the jobs I had a few years ago. I remember one night after work, I was especially hungry and wanted to get some food on the way home. It was after midnight though, so I knew I didn't have many options. Of course, as I was driving down the road, I saw a Taco Bell sign, and I knew they were usually open late, so I decided to stop there. I was not all that familiar with the area, because I only lived in that city for the job I had, and I was from another state entirely. As I pulled into the Taco Bell parking lot, I could see that it seemed a little outdated and run down. There was also nobody else there, but that wasn't all too strange with it being so late. The area did look pretty run down, and it was a little sketchy, but I didn't care. I was just really hungry. I pulled into the drive-thru. It took a while for the person to ask me what I wanted, but when they finally did, I ordered 2 beef burritos. I pulled around to the next window and paid. The worker said the food would be out shortly, and then walked away from the window. Once they walked away, it took a really long time for them to come back. I sat there waiting for about 5 minutes. I wondered why it would be taking so long because nobody else was here, and I had ordered one of the most common things on the menu. Still, I wasn't going to complain as long as I got my food. But then, out of nowhere, I felt the back passenger side door to my car try to be opened. I was driving an SUV, but thankfully my back doors were locked. I looked but couldn't see anybody. They must have quickly hid behind my car at an angle I couldn't see. Then I heard someone kick the back of my car. As they kicked it, I looked again and saw somebody duck down behind the back of my car. Then I started to see a man running out of a bush on the edge of the parking lot of the Taco Bell. He was running straight for my car and appeared to be wearing a ski mask covering his whole head. I didn't waste a moment and quickly hit the gas pedal and sped away. I could see him and another man running after me in my rearview mirror as I sped off. I left the area quickly and ended up driving home without getting any food. I reported the incident, but I never stopped at that Taco Bell again. This happened to me last year. I was hungry after a late night shift at work. It was past midnight, so I knew I didn't have many options. I saw a McDonald's and pulled off the highway to go there. McDonald's hours vary depending on the location, so I was hoping they would be open. However, the lights were fairly dim, so I wasn't quite sure. I decided to pull into the drive-thru to see. When I pulled up to the speaker, I heard a voice say, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's, what can I get you today?" I said I would have the number 9, and that was all. They said sure and to pull up to the first window. So I pulled my car around. However, when I reached the window, nobody came to it. I saw the kitchen lights appeared to be all dimmed as if they were closed. I waited there for a couple minutes. I knew I was the only customer, so I didn't know what was taking them so long. After another minute went by, I didn't see any movement at all. I took out my phone and searched McDonald's on Google Maps. The location came up, and when I looked, it said it was closed. I was confused and kept staring at my screen, wondering if this was a mistake. Just then, I saw somebody finally appear at the window out of the corner of my eye. It was a man in all black with a hood covering most of his face. As soon as I turned my head, he ducked down. I drove off as fast as I could and went straight home. I don't know who that was or what happened, but I do know I won't go back to that McDonald's. When I was in college, I worked at McDonald's during the summer. One day, I was working on a Saturday and I was behind the counter taking people's orders. It was going pretty well for a weekend until a man came up and asked for 2 Big Macs. I put in the order, he paid, and I gave him his receipt. I then helped the next person in line. About a minute later, he came back up and said he was charged for 2 Big Macs, but he only wanted 1. I told him he ordered 2 because I know I heard him say 2 Big Macs. He got angry when I said that and said, "Don't put words in my mouth, I know what I said." "I'm sorry, sir, I wasn't trying to," I said. He then told me not to get smart with him. I could tell he was a short-tempered man. I apologized again and offered to give him money back for a Big Mac and only give him the 1, but he said he didn't want that anymore. He then started saying that I should be fired. I told him to calm down, but that didn't work. He started raising his voice and everybody in the restaurant was beginning to notice. One of my coworkers, Jack, came up and started talking to the man. After a brief conversation with Jack, he said he didn't want anything and he just wanted to leave. We gave him his money and I thought the situation was over. That is until he leaned in over the counter and said to me, "When you get off, I'll be waiting for you." I didn't know whether to take this as a joke or not, but clearly the man had issues if he was going to make a scene over an extra Big Mac. I didn't say anything and he turned and walked out. I wasn't too concerned with this threat at all because I was only an hour into my 8-hour shift. I knew there's no way a man was going to wait around that long, and I didn't think he would actually do that at all. I worked the rest of my shift, which went by relatively well. In fact, by the time I was done, I had forgotten all about the incident. It was 10 p.m. when I was off, so I got my things and headed out to my car. As I approached my car, I saw a car at the other end of the parking lot's doors swing open. Sure enough, out walked the man from earlier. I couldn't believe he actually waited for me. I sprinted for my car and he chased after me. I almost made it to my door when he grabbed my arm. He started to pull me away from my car, and that's when I screamed like a little girl. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pepper spray and sprayed it everywhere. Eventually it got his face in the struggle and he let go of me and ran away. I accidentally sprayed myself in the face as well, but I was able to get into my car and lock the door with my eyes burning. It didn't get me too bad and I was able to regain my composure after a couple minutes. I saw 2 people walking towards my car in concern. They asked me if I was okay and if they should call the police. I said yes, and the police arrived shortly after and took down my information. Unfortunately, the man got away, but I just feel lucky that he didn't hurt me. It still blows my mind to think that he waited around 7 hours to confront me.
Ever since I first went to Chick-fil-A, it's been one of my favorite restaurants. I've always loved their chicken sandwiches, and their sauce always hits the spot. However, the college that I recently graduated from is in an area where there's no Chick-fil-A nearby, so when I was at school, I could never have it. Last year, when the semester finally came to an end, I was driving back home to get to my parents' house, and I had the idea to get Chick-fil-A. I left my school in the morning, and it was a 4-hour drive to get back home. When I got about an hour away from home, my cravings got the better of me, and I saw a Chick-fil-A and stopped. It was a Chick-fil-A that I had never been to before, but it looked relatively new and was very busy. I got in the drive-thru line, which was long but moving fast. I ordered the number 1, which is what I usually got, of a chicken sandwich, fries, and a drink. I was so hungry that I decided to park and eat it there. The Chick-fil-A was in a large shopping area that had a mall with a really big parking lot connected to it, so I drove to an open area of the mall parking lot that wasn't very busy. I started to eat, but before long I was kind of annoyed with the way that the sun was shining right into my front window onto me. I moved parking spaces down to where there was a shady spot near a tree. As I backed up my car out of the spot and started to drive, I saw that there was another car that was parked a little ways away from me that started to leave at the same time. I drove over and parked next to a tree, and the car followed me and parked about 10 spots away from me. I found it odd, but overall was more focused on eating. A while later, when I decided to continue with my drive home, I had forgotten all about the car and started to drive away. But when I did, I noticed the car start to drive with me. I never bothered to look to see who was driving it, and it was too far away to tell by this point. I once again found it odd, but what could I do? I got back on the road and then merged onto the freeway that was close by. I noticed the entire time that the car that was seemingly following me did the same. I got kind of worried when I saw this. I wondered why someone would follow me. Had I accidentally cut him off or something before? I kept on driving down the road and the car remained behind me the entire time. I tried some things like slowing down or changing lanes, but he kept following me. I still couldn't really tell much about how the driver looked because I still wasn't able to get a very good look at him. The closer I got to home, the more concerned I became because I didn't want to go all the way home and have this guy potentially know where I live. When I got about 10 minutes away from home, I decided to pull off the highway again and take the exit. I didn't really have much of a plan, but I knew I shouldn't go to my house with somebody following me. There was a little town that had a few stores and gas stations. I pulled into the parking lot of a supermarket and parked in a spot in the back where there weren't many other cars. Of course, the car that was following me did as well. I got out my phone and called my parents. I was going to tell them that I had been followed and ask them what to do, but before I could finish telling them, I saw that the car had parked in a spot behind me and a few spaces to the left. I noticed that the driver's door of the car opened and both passengers' doors in the back did as well. I saw 3 large men all get out of the car and start heading towards me. In this moment, as they approached my car, I panicked and slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away. I saw the men then stop and begin to run back to their car. This is where I got lucky in a way. There happened to be a police car that was driving on the quiet road connecting the supermarket with other businesses. When he saw me speeding away in an almost reckless way, he pulled me over. The car that was following me slowed down too, but then drove away. When the officer got to my window, he told me I was driving a little wild, and I told him my situation. He then gave me just a warning to slow down and drive safer, and offered to drive behind me for a few miles to make sure that I wasn't followed. I took him up on the offer, and luckily I was able to make it home safely without ever seeing that car again. This story happened about a year ago. I was at Chick-fil-A with my girlfriend one night. It was one of both of our favorite restaurants, and we would get it all the time. Usually we would go through the drive-thru, but tonight we decided to eat inside the restaurant. It was a little bit later at night, and not very many other people were there at all. We sat in a booth on the far side of the restaurant, and were all by ourselves for the most part. We were eating, joking around, and just having normal conversation, when all of a sudden I heard a banging at the window right in front of me. We were sitting by the window, so I was super startled. Because it was dark out and the way the window was, I couldn't really see out of it very well at first, but when I looked, I saw a man. There was a guy who looked pretty mean. He was angrily banging on the glass right in front of us. My girlfriend and I were both pretty startled, and we watched the man to see what his problem was. He started to yell something at us, but I couldn't understand what he was yelling. The man wore a dark sweatshirt with the hood up and appeared to wear glasses and have a brown goatee. I don't know if he was insane or what, because I certainly hadn't done anything to make him angry. The man then suddenly stopped yelling and turned his back on us, then sprinted away into the night. My girlfriend and I both looked at each other in shock. "What was that?" she asked. I figured the guy was insane or on drugs or something like that, but we were both just glad that he was gone. Like many Chick-fil-A's, it was next to multiple businesses, so we figured he had come from one of those. We both talked about it for a few minutes, and then were ready to go back home. I had to use the bathroom, so I told my girlfriend that I would be right back and then we would leave. I walked inside the bathroom and to the urinal and did my business. As I was in there, though, I remember seeing someone was using one of the stalls in the men's room. When I was done, I got to the sink and began washing my hands, when I heard the stall door start to open. I casually looked over to see who was coming out. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the same man who had been outside. He stopped in his place and just stared at me. Then, slowly, a really wide and creepy grin came over his face. I didn't waste any time and quickly left the bathroom as fast as I could. I saw my girlfriend was waiting for me by the door, and she could see the panic on my face. She asked me what was wrong, and I just told her we had to go. I didn't pay any attention to if the man followed us or not. When we got to the car, I told my girlfriend about how I had seen the man in the bathroom. She was really shocked to hear this, and we drove home after that. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. What was the most crazy thing is that we had a view of the only entrance to the restaurant the entire time, and we never saw the man come inside the door. I don't know how he was suddenly inside the bathroom, but thinking about it gives me the creeps. Last year, I went to Walmart at about 2 o'clock in the morning. I occasionally worked really late, and on this day, I worked well past 1 a.m. I needed to get groceries, and I really wasn't that sleepy yet, so I decided to stop at Walmart, knowing the store was open, but nobody would be there. I got in the store, which was in fact dead, and started to shop. I only noticed a couple of other shoppers. When I got to the back corner of the store to get yogurt, I noticed a man standing next to the shelves, just staring at me. At first, I thought maybe he knew me, but I didn't recognize him at all. He kept a completely straight face. He just wouldn't take his eyes off me. I said hi and nodded my head at him. He just kept staring. Didn't acknowledge me at all. I thought something must be wrong with him, so I got the yogurt and moved on. When I left the aisle, I heard him start to follow me. I tried my best to just ignore him. Maybe he was playing a dumb prank on me or something. I only needed about 2 more things, so I quick grabbed them and headed to the self-checkout. The man followed me all the way there, about 20 or 30 feet behind me the whole time. When I was checking out, I thought about alerting a store worker about the man, but I decided not to. I just wanted to get my stuff and go home. I finished checking out and began walking to my car. I got out of the doors of Walmart, and the man continued to follow me out into the parking lot. I increased my pace to get to my car so I could drive away. Then, the man started to full-out sprint at me. When I saw this, I ran to my car. I struggled to open the doors with bags in my hands. I finally got to the door and jumped inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The man reached my car and tried opening the door just a few seconds later. Now he didn't have a straight face anymore. He had a big smile which looked completely insane. He banged on my window until I quickly drove away. I have not shopped at Walmart since. A couple of years ago, I went to Walmart at night with 2 of my good friends, John and David. I don't remember exactly what we needed to get there, probably food or something, but I do remember that we wound up near the sports cards because John was really into them at the time. The 3 of us were in high school, and we were looking at a box of baseball cards when a man approached us. He looked to be about 25 to 30, was wearing a hood, and smelled like cigarettes. He asked us if we drove here and if we could give him a ride. I said, "No, sorry, I can't." He said that he didn't need to go very far, but he really needed a ride. I still said no, and he stood there for a good 10 seconds before finally walking away. My friends and I then went to another section of the store for a couple minutes before checking out and leaving. When we left the store, we saw the man again. He was standing outside the door smoking. He looked at us, so we tried to avoid eye contact, but he started to approach us again. We just ignored him. The man started to walk with us to my car. He said once more that he really needed a ride. I told him no yet again, and my friends and I got into my car. As we got in, to my surprise, he helped himself and got in the back seat. He said now we don't have a choice, with a smile. I told him to leave the car. He responded by saying he was not leaving until I drove him where he needed to go. Finally, I asked him where it was he needed to go. He replied by saying I would find out when I got there. This guy was being super sketchy, and I couldn't help but think of him having us drive him to a spot to get robbed or something. My friend John told him he was going to call the police if he didn't leave the car. The man said something along the lines of if we called the police, he would hurt us all. We were high school kids and not that big, but 3 against 1 I thought maybe we could take him. But then again, I had no idea what this man was capable of. The man told me to drive, and so I started to drive. Just a couple seconds later though, to my surprise, we saw a police car that happened to be pulling into the parking lot. The man cursed at us and then told me to stop. I stopped the car and he got out. I don't know if the man just really wanted a ride or if he had bad intentions, but I'm glad I didn't find out. I work at a Walmart, stocking shelves. I frequently work overnight shifts, and that's when much of the stocking is done. Our store is a 24-hour store, so I occasionally have to deal with customers, but usually I don't interact with them much at all. A couple of weeks ago, I was stocking the shelf of a cleaning supply aisle near the back of the store. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was restocking hand sanitizer when I heard someone walk from the aisle behind me to the aisle I was in. I briefly looked, and from the corner of my eye, I could see someone entering the aisle. I kept working, and I felt them walk past me into the other end of the aisle. The person then walked back over to me and tapped me on my shoulder. I looked, and I could see it was a man. He appeared to be about 25 years old, with a goatee and long hair. He asked me if I could help him with something. I asked him what he needed help with. He just stood there looking at me for a good 5 seconds before he responded. He finally told me that he needed some toothpaste. I told him where it was, but he insisted I go with. So I stopped working, got up, and started to walk with the man. As we were walking over, he seemed to know where we were going and was leading the way. When we finally arrived, I was shocked at what I saw. Just about every item from the shelves had been thrown onto the floor, and there was a huge pile of toothpaste as well as toothbrushes and other items all over the floor. The man just looked at me and smiled. I asked him if he did this. He smiled at me with a creepy smile and said yes. He then took off and sprinted away towards the exits and ran out the store. I ended up having to clean it up. This was by far the strangest thing that ever happened to me while working at Walmart.
It was approaching one of my niece's birthdays, and she's at the age where I think she would appreciate a gift from her uncle. I'm a poor college student with no car, so I commute everywhere and anywhere, knowing that I always take my backpack and headphones anytime I leave my house. So I'm at Walmart and have this care package planned out for my niece. She loves Elsa from Frozen, so I decided to get her a costume, doll, and candy, all Frozen themed of course. Like I mentioned earlier, any place I travel I usually have my headphones in. This is kind of a pain to explain, but this detail defines the whole story. Now I'm so lazy I use a third-party music app instead of the music app included on my iPhone. Unfortunately for me, this requires a good internet connection, and living in rural parts of Denver, my music ends up cutting in and out and then stops playing altogether. Now at this point I have one item left on my list, and I'm in the toy section of Walmart looking for an Elsa toy. Before I know it, this mom leaves her 2 children beside me. I'm not sure why, but this has happened before. Maybe I have a trustworthy face. Let me tell you all something now. There are so many strange things that happen in this world that I would be a fool to leave these 2 children alone. And for the record, I don't know these people at all. It's kind of a pain, but I figured it's just me being a good person. I don't even know how some people can do this. This is literally a woman leaving her 2 children at a section of the store and telling them to wait there for a short while. Anyways, One girl is around 4 years old and her sister was around 1 to 2 years old. The older sister had one missing crock and her younger sister had pajamas on and a pacifier in her mouth. I felt even more obligated to stay until their mom came back. And I was right. Not even 5 minutes passed since their mom left and some fool came up and started talking to these girls. I have lots of toys and candy in my car, and a dog too. He probably thought I wasn't listening because I had my headphones in. But like I said, by this point my music had cut out a long time ago. As soon as he mentioned his dog, I immediately made my way up to him. He was crouched down talking to the girl about the stuffed animal she had in her hand. My dog is really big. He's not pink, but he's nice. Would you like to come and meet him? I crouched down and pushed the girl back a few steps. Immediately the guy moved back a few steps himself. I extended my arm and shook my finger back and forth, gesturing to him, "No, not today." I gave the guy a very harsh look, like I knew exactly what he was doing. I just stared at him very attentively. The guy was very short in stature and had short, stringy hair with a tan pilot jacket. He was also wearing some very beat-up New Balance tennis shoes. He looked very plain, to describe him best. At this point, I was about to pounce on him and hold him down if need be. I'm not even a big guy myself, I just don't stand for any bull. Before that could happen, he immediately got up, turned right, and headed out the garden exit. I waited with the little girl and her sister until their mom came back. I said, "Yeah, you shouldn't leave your children alone. Some guy was talking to One Shoe over here about some generic bull, probably trying to kidnap your kids." Those were my exact words. I mean, there's no denying what just happened. Anyways, I told her she won't be as lucky next time. The mom just shook her head up and down and swallowed any spit that was in her mouth in a very harsh gulp. I don't know if something bad would have happened, but if my music had not stopped playing, let's just say neither one of those girls could speak for themselves. I live in a very populated city, and in approximately a 5-mile radius of my house, there's at least 3 major grocery stores, one of which is a Walmart. Being a 16-year-old girl, I visit Walmart regularly if I need notebooks or something for school, or if I want to browse makeup and things of that sort. I've never been uncomfortable going shopping by myself. I actually enjoy it, and I've never had any bad experiences being on my own. Until one day a few months back. On this particular Sunday, my parents were working and my little brother was at a baseball game, so I had been home alone all day. I needed body wash and a new lanyard for school. The school I attend requires we wear IDs around our necks on a lanyard. I think most high schools are doing this now and it's becoming more common. Anyway, mine broke the Friday before, so that was my main reason for going out. I got to Walmart and parked like I had 100 times before, went in and went straight to the purse section where the lanyards were. I walked down the aisle and there was a man looking at wallets hanging on the display. I didn't think much of him. He was probably in his mid-50s, average height and weight, wearing jeans and a brown t-shirt. He looked just like an old grandpa if I could best describe him. "Hi there," he said with a big grin. "Hi," I said with a grin back. "How are you today?" "I'm good. How are you?" I said, still browsing for a lanyard I liked. "Great. I'm just doing some shopping today." Another big smile. I thought it was weird that he explained that he was shopping since I could clearly see him looking at all the wallets on the racks, and I could have assumed he was shopping on my own. I decided it was nothing and moved on my way. I found what I needed and made my way over to the body wash. I was in no rush to be anywhere, so I was leisurely walking up and down the aisle, smelling anything that sounded interesting, when he walked by the aisle that I was in and smiled again. At this point, I was a little uneasy. I've always been taught to trust my gut instinct, and something just didn't feel right to me. I had never had a conversation with anyone in this Walmart before, and now it seemed that this man was following me. I texted a friend of mine to tell her that I thought I was being followed and where I was at as a precautionary measure. I decided that maybe it was just a coincidence. I mean, he could have just needed soap too, and continued on with my shopping. I went a few aisles up to face wash, and then when I had what I needed, I walked around the corner, where I ran into him again for the 3rd time. "Excuse me, young lady. Can I tell you something?" Yeah," I said with a quivering smile. "You are very beautiful." "Oh, thank you." I was very uncomfortable at this point. "Are you married?" Mind yourself that I'm only 16 and definitely didn't look old enough to be married. No. "Me either," he said with a grin that turned my heart to ice and made my stomach turn. "Do you have a boyfriend?" Yeah," I stammered as I forced a smile on my face to try and hide my fear. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time. He began to speak again when a man, probably 17 or 18, standing in the aisle perpendicular to us, looking at cologne, walked over and said, "Yeah, she does. She's with me." He gave me the biggest smile and stood super close to me as if he was the boyfriend I had said yes to having. "Oh, I figured," said the man. He seemed very uncomfortable at the presence of another male. "Good luck to you two." And with that, he walked away. I turned towards the man and thanked him for coming to my rescue. He said he could tell by the tone of my voice and look on my face something was up and was hoping I would play along with him. He watched me check out to make sure the man didn't follow me out of the store, and I was cautious before turning onto the street since I lived so close to the store. This was the last I saw of either of them. I have no idea what the old man's intentions were, but sometimes you just know in your gut that something is wrong, and that day I knew. Something about him was terrifying and sinister. I'm so grateful for the guy who helped me out, but to the old man who was following me in Walmart, please, find someone your own age. I live on campus at a public university in a small college town. It's a pretty quiet existence, but I like the peace, and I'm rarely bothered by too much in the way of general excitement. My roommate and I usually just spend our time watching Netflix and eating microwave macaroni in our dorm. Typical college stuff. I don't really do much on campus, save for the occasional walk at night to our school's computer lab. Most days are generally pretty uneventful for me, with the exception of today. Me and my roommate drink a lot of water, so we have to buy a couple of cases every few weeks. I decided to go to Walmart to pick up our refill, and he stayed behind to finish some homework. I left around 8 o'clock and drove into town to run a few errands late before stopping at Walmart. I don't know what it is about that place, but I dread going there. Something just isn't right with the type of people who hang out at Walmart in the middle of the night. But I usually just ignore the typical wanderers and weirdos and go on with my business. I grabbed a couple of cases and hurried to the self-checkout. It was approaching 9 o'clock, and that's usually when the strangest folks set up camp for the night. I paid at the machine, grabbed the receipt between my index and middle fingers, and then grabbed the water to carry them out to my truck without a cart. I wasn't parked too far out, but I was far enough that the crowd of cars was thinner than it is close to the entrance. I don't know why, but for some reason I hate parking up front. I went to set the cases of water in the bed of my truck, but as I lifted up, a quiet breeze and a lack of grip on my part allowed the receipt to fly off from my hand. I finished putting the water up and chased after it. The small piece of crumpled up paper had drifted into an empty part of the lot underneath the streetlight. I bent over to pick it up, and I noticed something. A phone. It was a white iPhone 5C laying face down on the asphalt in between the yellow lines of a parking space. There was a huge scratch across the black Apple logo, and the thing looked pretty beaten up in general. Now, typically I'm the type of guy to leave things alone that don't have anything to do with me, but there were no cars anywhere around it, and I thought maybe I could find the owner, so I picked it up. The screen was all but shattered with a huge crack in the top right corner covering most of the thin black piece of glass on the front. It was apparent to me that someone had probably dropped it, loading it into their vehicle unknowingly. I slid it into my pocket and headed home. I got back to the room around 9:15 and my roommate was gone. He had went to the lab to finish studying for his Japanese class. I unloaded the water and began to take everything out of my pockets. I set the phone down on the dresser and checked my phone to see if I had any texts or group chat messages. I didn't. I picked up the white phone and pressed the home button. The screen hesitantly lit up with a background picture of two girls I didn't recognize. They were both blondes and they were posing for the photo as any typical sorority girls would. They were definitely young, probably in their early 20s. I swiped the screen to unlock it, but it required a 4-digit passcode. Of course I didn't know it, but I took a couple of failed guesses. There was no way for me to figure out who the phone belonged to, so I set it on my dresser. I know a guy in my stats class who has jailbroken iPhones before, so I figured I would just take it to him later. I undressed for the night and got into bed around 10 o'clock. That was almost 3 hours ago. I'm still in my room, and it's approaching 1 in the morning. My roommate is pulling a late-night study session with a friend of his, so I haven't seen him for a while. 20 minutes ago, the phone rang. It was the regular iPhone ring, and the contact name was Kara. The picture ID that came up was one of the girls on the front of the phone. I figured it must have been the owner's friend calling to see if someone had stolen the phone. I sat there as it rang a few times, quickly debating whether to answer or not. After 5 or 6 rings, I picked up the phone and slid the bar to answer. I put it up to my ear, but before I could say anything, a loud screaming voice came across the receiver.
Jen, please help me. Oh God, he's going to kill me, Jen.
The voice cut off abruptly, and there was a thud as though the phone had been dropped. I heard a sound like heavy breathing, and then the receiver beeped, signaling the end of a call. I'm sitting in bed now, wide awake. I don't know what to do. I can't sleep. Jen, please contact me to get your phone back. I don't want anything to do with it.
So when I was a senior in high school, this would have been around 2007, I was out of the blue contacted one day by this random guy on MySpace. I vaguely recognized him, but I didn't know him. He told me that he knew me from school, and that I had tutored him in math a couple of times. This should have been my first red flag that something was off. I hate math, and I've never tutored anyone on that topic. I told him that he was mistaken, but I tried to be nice to him and we struck up a friendly conversation. Soon, the guy, Brian, started talking to me at school. It started off pretty innocently. He was giving me more attention than I wanted from him, but I was kind of flattered by it, and I didn't really think much of it at the time. He was a couple of years younger than me, and I figured he had developed a crush on me primarily because we're both kind of odd compared to the other kids at our high school. It was a very small school. My graduating class was only about 40 people, and he and I were 2 of a very small number of alternative kids there. He was emo, while I tended to be more of the punk variety. Both of us loved My Chemical Romance. I figured he was into me because there weren't many other girls there with similar interests. Before long, he started waiting for me at my locker every day, between every class. He started following me around before school and during lunch. He started coming to my performances. I was in drama and choir. I tried to be polite, but started avoiding him. The situation continued to escalate to the point where he was sexually harassing me every chance I failed to avoid him. If he was waiting for me at my locker, he would say sexually explicit things to me, tell me what he wanted to do to me. Luckily, my girlfriends were with me and came over as soon as they noticed him talking to me, which made him scurry away. As quickly as it started, it was over. One day he stopped showing up at school. I was relieved but curious. After about a month of him being gone, my friend mentioned him in front of my dad, who was also the principal of my high school. My dad asked me about what happened, and I ended up telling him the whole story. He seemed really troubled. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me why Brian was absent from school recently. Apparently, not long after homecoming, Brian had strapped some fireworks to a cat and set them off. The cat exploded, and Brian laughed. He got caught and was sent to jail, and then was committed to a psychiatric facility by his parents after he was released. I don't know what happened to him after that. I'm thinking I dodged a bullet though, because he turned out to be even crazier than I thought he was. This happened when I was in high school. A few weeks in, I had made a few friends and I was keen on making more. so I would socialize a lot in the hopes that I would get more friends out of it. I was still somewhat new to the school, and one day, I got lost. This is where I met the guy who would eventually become my stalker. He showed me around and helped me get to the class I needed to go to, and we made conversation, and at first I thought he would be nice to have as a friend. A week passed and I had made a few more friends at this point. I wanted to hang out with him as much as I could. I felt a little bad because my other friend was a bit of a loner, so I invited him to come hang out with us. He didn't talk much at first, but after a while he eventually opened up to me, and then he wouldn't shut up. He mostly talked to me. He started asking me advice on life and whatnot, and I was happy to help. That is, until he started asking me to pat his head like a dog and make him wear a leash. It was a bit weird, you might say. I passed it off as a joke, and I humored him, something I never should have done. He started calling me his master or mistress. I asked him not to do that, and I told him that I wasn't comfortable with this behavior, but it was apparently too late to fix things. He started skipping his classes to walk into and get kicked out of mine. He would follow me around all day, and if I would go to the restroom, guess who would follow me inside? I asked him to stop many times. He refused, so I tried to get the school involved. They had no proof of stalking, and I found that kinda strange since many of my teachers have kicked him out of my classes, but nevertheless, nothing happened. He began to get more aggressive when I asked one of my guy friends to help me out with a homework assignment. My stalker overheard this from around the corner and didn't like who I asked for help. After that, he would pretty much fight and harass every male I would talk to. Some would probably find this flattering, but I found it annoying and immature. I tried to tell him not to worry and that we were just friends, but his exact wording was,
"They don't deserve you. They are worthless compared to my master."
I then yelled at him. I do feel bad because it was quite harsh, but I was about fed up with his, and if he wanted to act like a dog, I was going to treat him like one. I thought I was finally free from that cycle. He finally stopped following me around, until one day I found this letter in my locker. In this letter, my stalker gave his disgust for males and his hate for himself, and that he must be evil for his master to treat him this way, and that I must be taught not to shun pets. It was a few pages long, and it was very disturbing. In fact, it was the most terrifying thing I had ever read, especially when I got done reading it and looked up and saw him staring at me from down the hall. He came up to me and opened his phone and started showing me pictures of a cartoon character who had a similar appearance to me, with the same brown eyes and curly hair. Then, he tried to hand me a leash and asked me to walk him around. At that point, I ran away, up to the office, letter in hand. The principal finally had the proof he needed and agreed to step in. The cops got involved, and soon after, a restraining order was put in place. He was expelled and wasn't allowed within 50 feet of me. About a month after that, I was sitting in my room one night, doing some homework, when I heard a scratch at the window. I looked over, and then froze in pure terror. My stalker was standing just outside my bedroom window. He had a collar around his neck, and a leash was dangling down from it. He was intensely glaring at me through the glass. His face then crooked into a disgusting grin before licking the surface of the window and ran off. I flipped out and woke my parents, who called the police. When the cops showed up, I told them who it was and what he did. They collected the evidence from my window and arrested my stalker for breaking the restraining order. Thankfully, I moved out of that town a month later, and I never heard from my stalker again. I still have nightmares about this to this day. Being stalked was not romantic or fun. It was terrifying, bone-shaking, and nerve-wracking, and the worst thing I have ever gone through. but I do hope that he got those issues worked out. I live in a very rural area of New Brunswick, Canada. It was early September, and it was my first day of school. I unfortunately was held back in my senior year, so I would be returning to high school as a 19-year-old. Since we lived in a very isolated area, the middle and high school shared the same building. I had study hall for first period. However, when I entered, I noticed that there was a new student on the other side of the room. He stood out because, like I said, it was a small community. I walked over to him and introduced myself. We shook hands, and he told me that his name was Chester. Apparently, he had just moved to the area. Being the friendly Canadian that I am, I showed him around the school and where his next class was. As I was giving him a tour, I noticed that he seemed a bit off. He began to ask me questions. At first, they seemed harmless, like how long I had been there, or where a certain classroom was. But then, he began asking me some questions that seemed odd. He then asked me for my home address and Snapchat. And yes, it was as awkward as it sounds. I was completely taken off guard by this. I did not give him my home address, but I thought, what harm could it do to give him my Snapchat? A decision that I would later regret. When the last period of the day came, I had English class. There were only 9 students in that class. I took a seat, and that's when I looked behind me and saw Chester. He didn't notice me right away. He was too busy making out with a sandwich. It was disgusting. He looked up and noticed me. Imagine that you're present at a murder trial, and the defendant turns around and looks directly at you. That should give you an idea of how uncomfortable I felt. He then gestured for me to walk over to him. Class was about to start, so I just ignored him. 5 minutes later, I look up from my book, and I notice that Chester is now staring daggers at me. The look in his eyes was predatory. He must have saw me as the next sandwich he was going to devour. Again, he gestured for me to walk over to him. I know an underwear-sniffing weirdo when I see one. I ignored him and continued reading my book. Then my phone pinged. It was a Snapchat message. Of course, it was from Chester. "Follow me." I replied, "We're in the middle of class right now." He got it from his table and asked the teacher if he could use the bathroom. He then walked out into the hall. I wanted to see why he wanted me to follow him. So, about 5 minutes passed, and I asked the teacher if I could use the bathroom as well. When I exited the classroom, I saw that Chester was about 50 feet away, walking very slowly. This guy was weird. I kept at a distance behind him, so he wouldn't know I was there. He then turned down the hallway that led to some storage rooms and the basement. I saw him open a door, walk inside, and closed it behind him. Confused, I walked over to the door he walked through, and I recognized it as the entrance to the school's basement. There was no way in hell I was following him down there. I just casually walked back to class. When I sat back down, my phone pinged again. "Why didn't you enter the basement?" Okay, so now I'm thoroughly creeped out by this guy. I just replied, "Look, just leave me alone. You creep me the hell out." I then blocked him. When I got home that day, I immediately started on my homework. By the time I was all done, it was around 11 p.m., and I was all by myself. I was putting all my stuff away when I received a new Snapchat notification. Someone had added me as a friend, but it was from an account called "Why Didn't You Enter the Basement?" I knew it was Chester, so I blocked it. Not even 30 seconds later, I got another request. This time, the account was called Why did you block me? I blocked that one as well. Then another one came in. This time, it was even more ominous. I know where you live. Followed by, I'm right outside your house. I then heard a window break downstairs. I immediately called the cops and told them what was happening. The operator said to find somewhere to hide and lock the door. I hung up and went into the hallway closet. My worst nightmare came true as I heard footsteps moving up the stairs. The closet that I was hiding in overlooked the staircase. I then saw a dark figure appear. As it moved into the light, I saw him. It was Chester. As soon as he reached the top of the stairs, he made his way to the middle of the hallway and then stopped. He then looked directly at the closet I was hiding in. It was like I was in a horror film. I didn't want to freak out and give away that I was hiding in that closet, so I retreated further in, concealing myself behind some thick winter coats. Chester then opened the door and peered inside. He couldn't seem to find the light switch and eventually gave up. After moving from room to room, I heard his footsteps descending back down the stairs. A few minutes later, the police knocked on the front door. I immediately left the closet and went downstairs and opened it up and told them what was happening. Of course, by the time that they arrived, Chester was nowhere to be found. After they searched the house, they determined that he escaped through a window in my basement. I showed the police the Snapchat activity, and they said that they would do their best to track him down. The next school day, I went to the principal's office to report Chester. I sincerely believe that he was a threat to both myself and the other students. But here's the creepiest part of the story. My principal told me that there was no new student named Chester. He must have snuck into the school somehow and blended in with the other kids, and none of the staff bothered to confirm that he was actually a new student. Thankfully, he was never seen again, and I never heard any follow-up from the police either. To this day, I still think about what would have happened to me if I had followed him into the school basement. I might have been his next sandwich. In early September, I started my senior year of high school. I was a bit of a loner, and usually kept to myself. I lived in a very rural area in northern Washington state, so it took me some time to drive to school. During my second period class, there was a student named Keith. I didn't really know him that well, but he never really seemed to bother anyone before. I noticed that Keith was staring at me. I was at the far right desk in the front row. He mouthed a few words to me, but I could not understand what he was trying to tell me. As the day went on, I would occasionally see him in the hallways, giving me nasty looks. I tried my best to ignore him, but something about this guy seemed disturbing. Finally, it was the last period of the day, and I was about to leave. However, I stopped dead in my tracks when I noticed Keith at the end of the hall, staring right at me. I acted like I didn't see him and tried to blend in with a crowd of students who were leaving, but as I walked out the door, he watched me get into my car. I remember looking into my rearview mirror to see him standing by the parking lot, watching me as I drove away. By the time I got home, I had forgotten all about Keith's strange behavior. Later that night, I received a text from an unknown number. I know where you live. I didn't know what to think, so I ignored it, thinking that it was a spam message, and continued working on my homework. A while later, I received another text. This time, it was more alarming. It was a picture of me walking into my school. The number then sent another picture of me in the school hallway. Both of the photographs were taken from behind. Another message then came in. It was my home address. My parents weren't home at the time, so I quickly shut off all the lights in the house and closed the blinds. The last window I got to was in the living room. I briefly looked outside to see a silhouette standing in my front yard. It was too dark to see who it was, but I closed the curtains and made my way to the basement and waited. An eerie silence settled in, as if something could happen at any moment. The silence was disrupted by the sound of the front door handle being turned. Thankfully, it was locked, but the fact that someone was trying to get inside was terrifying. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps above me. Whoever was outside had found a way inside. I quickly hid under an old desk. I should have called the cops when I had the chance. I guess I didn't really think someone would actually break in. And now, I didn't want to give away my hiding spot. My worst fears came true when I heard the basement door creak open. I could see the light from the upstairs hallway shine in for a split second before it was switched off, plunging the basement into darkness again. It was now silent and pitch black. I then heard a voice speak. It was Keith. "I know you're down there. I can see you. Come out now." I didn't know if he was bluffing, so I didn't move. He then slowly walked down the stairs and made his way around the room. I could hear him knocking things over and getting closer and closer. He then stopped directly in front of the desk. My heart was pounding a mile a minute. All went silent again, until Keith spoke. "Well, I gave you a chance to make this easy, but now you've really pissed me off." At this point, my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I could see that Keith was holding a hammer in his right hand. Without thinking, I sprung out from under the desk and shoved Keith, sending him backwards, and then made a beeline to the basement stairs. "I'm going to kill you!" I heard something flying across the room and smashing into the old TV by the staircase. I would later find out that he threw the hammer. As soon as I got upstairs, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, then ran out the front door.
"Let me out! I'll brains dead!"
I immediately called the police, and then my parents. I heard sirens in the distance. When the cops pulled up, I told them that he was locked inside the basement. When they entered the house and opened the basement door, Keith was gone. He escaped by smashing out a window. It turns out that I had forgotten to lock the side door, which is how Keith got inside. I told the police who Keith was and showed them the disturbing messages I received earlier. 2 days later, I was called to the principal's office. I was told that Keith had been arrested and would never be allowed back to school again. Thankfully, I never saw him after that. As far as Keith's motives were, he may have had some kind of psychotic meltdown and decided to act on a preconceived obsession of me. It's truly scary. One day he seemed so unassuming, and the next, he was in my basement, trying to kill me with a hammer.
This happened back in 2010. I was working in a hotel in a suburban area. Nice place. When I first started there, I was both a PT front desk clerk and a PT night auditor. For those of you not in hospitality, I closed the day out on the computers on the overnight shift. I had just been promoted to a day job and had a week left at the front desk before I was switching to my Monday through Friday gig, and it was just like any other night. At about 3 a.m., I received a phone call. The guy sounded my age, mid-20s, and attempted to strike up a conversation with me. I have to give my name when answering the phone, so he gets my name, of course, and starts asking me personal questions. Do you have a boyfriend? Would you want to go out for a drink, etc.? Which were harmless, but nevertheless I tell him I'm hanging up as I had a job to do. He wouldn't give me a name. Instead he said, "Why don't you call me John?" I hang up and finish my shift. The next night at about 3:30 a.m., I receive another phone call from John. He started off with asking me out for a drink again, to which I declined and hung up the phone. He called back about 5 times that night, each time getting more lewd in his comments, and just tried to keep me talking. He ended his last call with the phrase, "I see you like singing karaoke. I love doing that. Let's go out together sometime." He found me on Twitter. I had just gone out for a few nights prior with my friends and posted about it. I asked him how he got my full name, and he wouldn't tell me. I hung up again, and he was done for that night. I deleted my Twitter and Foursquare pages, and when my boss came in at 7 a.m., I told him what had been going on. We told my GM, and my security guard put it into his record. I only worked 2 overnights a week, luckily, but when I came back the next week, so did he. The phone calls started at around 3 a.m. and lasted for an hour or so, but this time was a little different. John was angry that I had deleted my accounts so he couldn't keep an eye on me and make sure I wasn't cheating on him. I told him that I'm not answering the phone anymore. My security guard will be taking all of my calls going forward. The phone was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then he screamed, "You're going to be with me whether or not you like it. I'm coming for you," and hung up the phone. I, of course, called the police. Luckily, I had my security guard there, so I wasn't completely alone, but it must have been a slow night because it took the cops mere minutes to get there. I called my night shift supervisor, who left at 11 p.m., and he managed to calm me down. One cop was nice enough to stay until my shift was done, and with that I told my boss that even though I had a week left of overnights, I couldn't and wouldn't do it. Thankfully, they understood, and I moved to daytime hours, as well as sent an email out to everyone telling them that anyone who called for me was sent directly to the GM. Thankfully, everything stopped after that, minus a few phone calls the security guy got for about a week. He told the guy that I had quit because of him, and the calls stopped. This happened in the fall of 1993, when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could handle the job, but I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about this time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, as well as an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation in the first place. I had just gotten off of work, and it was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking nervous and scared. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they had a fight. She walked up to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking, and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large light green car, like a Caddy or a Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shadowy figures inside. She said they threatened her, and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well-dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out, so I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car, that I'd take her home. At that time on a weeknight, there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and kept looking for the car. I assumed she was just scared. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed she was looking around the car, and she started asking me about money.
Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money.
My stomach sank. I have this woman in my car, and now she's gonna rob me? But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around the seat again and started yelling.
There they are! There they are!
She didn't sound scared anymore. I checked the rear view, and sure enough, the light green car is right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, telling me all the messed up shit these guys are planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I had been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really angry. I realized three key things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead, with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. The crazy bitch still hadn't put on her seatbelt. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had just started to move, and they hadn't caught up. The bitch started yelling. I slammed on the brakes and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some serious batshit crazy stuff. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "Get the f*** out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open. I started shoving and punching her until she tumbled out the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger's door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door, and then I cut across town and got onto the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down, and then I drove home. I told my sister, I was living with her temporarily after the breakup with my ex, about everything that had just happened. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. I had just finished my first year of university and had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 of the 4 of these shifts a week. The next week, I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would be just me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wasn't very busy. The best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer, so I couldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is about 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from severe health problems, one of which made all of his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend himself or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 to 2 a.m., Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town about 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing my video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop. My mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window I could see someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front room with the office. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed and I finally built up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again, and he looks up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies with, "I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home." I asked him if he needed a cab and, if so, where he was going. He told me he lives about 20 minutes away and wants Dave to take him home. After that, shit started to get weird. I called over to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and that he wanted a ride. He told me he'd be another 10 minutes or so. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there are two great big bay windows that make it easy to see what is happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all, but he seemed really angry at something, so I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room, and as I get closer to the gentleman, that's when I see it. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and knee. I asked him again if he's okay, then I offered to call an ambulance for him. Bad idea. "You don't need to be doing that," he told me. "It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home." "I'm sorry. I just noticed that you're bleeding pretty badly and thought maybe you'd like someone to make sure you're okay," I replied. "I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. But it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home." "Okay," I tell him. "But you're bleeding." "It ain't like I killed nobody," he replied. "I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone." Silence for a few minutes. He notices the phone clutched in my hand. "I fell down," he blurted out. "Pardon?" "I fell," he repeated. "That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody." He suddenly got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared. Blood was now on the chair and floor. I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he hadn't killed anyone, and that I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front. The man gets into the car and they drive off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I call the cops. I reported what happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrested him. Turns out this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out. He injured him with a sharp object, I assume a pocket knife or needle, took off running, fell and managed to find his way to the taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him, so technically no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to murder someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name is Duke, which explains the rat tail, and he has a history of violence. He also has a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to that night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed apparently didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't, since I still see Duke every now and then walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means he didn't get arrested. But in all seriousness, I wish you guys could have seen this rat tail. That thing was impressive. It was winter 2012 and I was 18 or 19 at the time. I was working at a petrol station in an average-sized town in England. It was an okay job, good money for somebody who was at college at the time, and it was just a shame it was a weekend job. So while my friends were getting drunk and having fun, I was in a petrol station serving taxi drivers and the occasional drunk. It started off like any other night. Serve people, clean up, do stock, the average night shift work. Since it was winter, the night was really dark and you could only see faint outlines of people walking back and forth even with streetlights. The place where I worked was situated across the road from a pub and had an alley running beside it that led to a housing estate. Around 3 to 4 a.m. as I finished cleaning a set of shelves, I noticed a figure standing in the alley just out of the light, but just enough to hide his face, but you could make out his clothing. I initially brushed it off as somebody waiting for a taxi as it seemed harmless enough. I sat down in my chair behind the counter and looked at my phone and played some games for a bit. When I looked up, it was 5 a.m. and he was still there, waiting, watching me. To make my situation worse, after 5 there was hardly any traffic or passerbys. I had that guttural feeling that he had some harmful intent. I was safe, however, as I locked in till the morning. I stared back in a trance, trying to keep an eye on whatever he would do next. After a while, I needed to use the toilet, so I went and came back thinking that he might have walked off. But he didn't. He was still there. I then decided not to do my last job until my coworker came in to start their shift, as my last job was to take out the fire extinguishers and sand buckets. It got to be about 6 a.m. The figure faded back into the alley, and I didn't see him for the rest of the shift. When my coworker arrived, it was still dark, and I usually walked the 10 minutes back home, but I got a taxi home after that shift. I felt that the guy could be anywhere, still watching me. I told my coworkers and family members about my experience, and they said they personally haven't experienced anything like it and wouldn't like to either. I was very nervous when doing my shifts from then on, feeling like as soon as I let my guard down, he would strike, but thankfully nothing else happened after that. I quit the following summer to go to university.
I worked at a gas station for a brief period of time almost 5 years ago. During that time, I worked overnight shifts. The city that the gas station was in, I would describe as pretty quiet and small. In the overnight hours, there would never be much business. I would be the only one working for most of my shift, and I'm kind of surprised that we were even open all night at all. The gas station was along a road not too far off the highway, so it would get some traffic. There weren't really any other businesses close by though. Probably 3 weeks after I started working there, I had gotten the hang of the routine. But still, I was always a little nervous working overnights. Being by myself in the gas station, not knowing if anybody who walked in there could be dangerous, was something I thought about far too much. But through the first couple of weeks that I had worked there, nothing too unusual happened. But that all changed one night. The time was probably 2, maybe 2:30 a.m. Things were very quiet. As I sat behind the counter, I saw a car pulling into the gas station from the road. The car drove past the 4 gas pumps that we had and started driving towards the parking spaces right out front. But it didn't park there. Instead, it turned and went to the side of the building. There were a couple of extra parking spaces there. Maybe 30 seconds later, I saw somebody. It was a man, and he was walking towards the door. He opened the front door and came inside. When he did, he walked straight towards me at the counter. The man then spoke, saying that there was a problem with the free air that we had. On the side of the building, in front of one of the parking spaces, we had free air that people could use to fill their tires. The guy said that his car had terrible air pressure in the tires, and he really needed it and asked me to help. I wanted to help the guy, but I really didn't know how to fix the machine if it was in fact broken. Beyond knowing how to use the machine, I didn't know much about it. I told the man that I probably wouldn't be able to help him, but he asked that I come out and try anyways. I agreed to, and I followed the man outside the gas station. We walked out front around to the side. When we got there, I saw the man's car. It was an SUV, and it was not parked at the space for air, but was parked like 3 spaces over instead. I also looked at his tires, and the ones that I saw appeared to have plenty of air in them. Things were starting to seem a little bit strange. Furthermore, when we got to the air pump, I picked it up to see that it was working just fine. I said to the man that it seemed to be working. He told me that when he tried it, it didn't work, and then asked me to explain to him how to use it. I started explaining it to the man. He stood right next to the building as I stood in the parking space where you would park to use the machine. As I spoke, I saw out of the corner of my eye the SUV start moving. It looked like it was backing up. I was about to ask the man if that was his car, but he told me to keep explaining. I started to, but then heard a sudden screeching of tires. When I looked to the side, I saw the SUV headed straight towards me. I jumped out of the way and got to the sidewalk next to the building just before the car would have ran me over. The car ended up hitting the air pump and then quickly turning to the side. I saw it start to back up. I got up and ran for the gas station door. The other man who had been standing talking with me had already ran away around the building towards the back of it. I got inside the gas station and went to lock the doors immediately. The car outside drove around and then back to the side. I got to the doors, locked them, and then witnessed the car speeding out of the parking lot and back onto the road. I kept the store closed for a while with the doors locked. Nobody tried to go in during that time though. I made a call to the police, who came out a short time later and took down all of the information that I could give them. We did have a few security cameras. Unfortunately, none of them were angled to show that side of the building. One of the cameras at the gas pump saw the car speeding away, but the quality was not nearly good enough to show the license plates. All I could give was the make and model of the car and a description of the man. In the end, that was enough to make me quit that job. I gave my 2 weeks notice the next day and got another job after that. Working overnights at a gas station wasn't for me, and I have a lot of respect for the people that do it. I'm not sure why those guys tried to run me over either. I could have been seriously injured that night.
So when I was a senior in high school, I began babysitting for a single mother, Angela. She had 2 kids, Lauren, who was 12, and Ryan, who was 7. Now, Angela had recently divorced from her husband, and I started babysitting for their family before the separation, so I had a sideline view of the messy situation at hand. After the divorce was finalized, Angela came into a good deal of money and ended up buying a 2-story, white brick old house in a historic neighborhood of my town. Now, when I say this house was old, it was old. The type of old that carries a smell with it. The type you can hear in every floorboard. The type that carries so much history, you can't but feel like memories are seeping out of the walls. The type of old that is pleasant during the day, magical even. But at night, it seems foreign, scary, like you're just a guest passing through a structure that will remain long after you have left. So, when I was watching the kids one Friday night, which was a normal night with them, Angela always said she had dinner plans with friends, but I know she was going to a bar and getting plastered because she would always come home and leave the money on the dining room table, yell thank you in a slurred voice, and proceed to walk up the incredibly creaky stairs, all without coming into contact with me. On this night, it was around 9 p.m., and I had just gotten the kids into bed. They each had their own bedrooms but slept in Ryan's bunk beds because she hated sleeping alone. Usually, Lauren would stay awake and play with her tablet for a little bit before falling asleep. But Ryan usually passed out pretty quickly, once I could finally get him to stop getting up, for water or to pee for another story. It would literally take 20 to 30 minutes to get him to bed. Anyway, it's 9 p.m. I'm alone downstairs in the den. The actual living room didn't have a TV, it was more of a sitting room. And the den, of course, was closed off and had its own door. There's only one way in or out of that room, which I left open so I could listen upstairs for the kids if they needed me, or if they were sneaking out of bed. As I'm sitting on the couch flipping through the channels trying to find something to watch on TV, I hear a very light knock on the front door. Now, I can see the front door from where I'm sitting because it was a straight shot from the den, and the couch was back far enough that all I had to do was lean my head back. I should note here, the only lights that were on inside the house were the upstairs hall light, the den lights, and a small lamp in the kitchen. The only light that allowed me to see the front door is what it cast down the staircase. The front door did have 2 slender windows on either side of it, but they had curtains that were drawn. So apart from the solid door and 2 closed curtain windows, I couldn't see outside on the front porch. Maybe it was because the house was so old, and I used to hear it creak all the time, or because I'm a lock freak and keep all entrances, windows included, to any place I'm staying, locked tight. I had seen way too many horror movies to forget to lock a door, so I didn't go peek out one of the windows. I simply decided to ignore it, even though it definitely started up my adrenaline. I continue flipping through the channels. At this point, I'm not really paying attention to the TV anymore. Maybe a minute passes. I hear the knock again, but this time, it's a little louder. Loud enough that I can no longer pass it off as the house creaking. Quiet enough that it wouldn't wake the kids. Now I have no choice but to get up off the couch and peek out one of the windows. Trying to be sneaky, I crouch down and look out the window from a really low way if someone was watching through the curtains that hopefully they wouldn't see me. But when I draw the curtains back, no one is there. The only things I see are an empty street illuminated by the classic looking street lamps and a very dark front yard due to the shadows being cast by several large wide trees. I'm not gonna lie to you, I was pretty freaked out. I'm a high school senior babysitting 2 kids asleep in bed in a large old house that already gives me the creeps on its own. I was literally in the setting of every single horror movie right now. Having too much adrenaline to go back and try to watch TV, but not feeling threatened enough to call Angela or the cops yet, I opt for sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, which was right in front of the door, and playing on my phone, checking the front door lock before I go to sit down just in case. I kid you not, maybe 10 seconds after I'd sat down, I hear the knock again. But this time, instead of being sneaky, I simply peek out the curtain at eye level, just in time to see someone run behind one of the trees in the front yard. Let me tell you, I actually let out a sigh of relief. Where I grew up, Ding Dong Ditch was a staple for teenagers, and I could handle harmless teenager pranks. Usually, to get the ditchers to stop, just simply turn on the porch light. So that's what I did. I laughed a little as I walked back to the couch. I should have reasoned that it was just a prank from the beginning. But as my butt hits the couch once again, I hear yet another knock. But this time it's even louder than the last 2. So now my anxiety has turned to annoyance. I've got 2 sleeping kids upstairs, and if this knocking persists, it could wake them, leaving me to the task of getting them back to bed. So, up from the couch I go, I pull one of the curtains back, revealing an empty lit front porch, and proceed to flick the porch light on maybe 5 or 6 times, leaving the light on after I'm done. But instead of going back to the couch, I stand there and wait with the curtain open, daring any teenager to try to ring that doorbell or knock one more time. After a few minutes, I feel confident that I may have gotten them to leave. So I turn the porch light off, close the curtains, and head back to the den. What greets me 5 minutes later is the loudest knocking I've ever heard. It honestly sounded like someone was trying to break the door down. At this point, I don't know what I'm feeling more, anger or fear. I rush to the front door, pull back a curtain, Flip on the light, and I come face to face with a person wearing a full-on bunny rabbit costume. Think the Easter bunny, but the costume looks 50 years old and is incredibly dirty. For maybe 10 seconds, I just stand there in utter shock. A creepy bunny costume was the last thing I expected to see. A teenager laughing his head off? Sure. An escaped convict wielding a knife? Sure. A dirty old bunny rabbit costume? Not a chance. The creepiest part was, they're just standing completely still, staring straight ahead at the front door, until they slowly turned their masked head and looked directly at me. And that is when I noticed that the mesh eyes that are usually on costumes like this, you know, the ones to allow a person to have some sort of vision, have been completely cut out. So I'm actually looking right into the eyes of the person hiding inside this thing. And that is what triggers my fight or flight. Not because there was a creep rabbit stranger on the front porch, but because those eyes looked so empty, I felt like I might be swallowed up if I stared into them for too long. I jumped back from the window, pulled the cell phone from my back pocket, and went to dial 911, still keeping my eyes on the bunny man, but further away from the window now.
911, please state your emergency.
There's a man on my front porch in a creepy bunny costume. He's been knocking on the door for a little over 10 minutes.
Okay, ma'am. Is he still on the porch now?
Yes, he's staring at me through the window. Can you send someone here, please? Fast. I'm babysitting 2 kids.
Alright, can you give me your name and address? We will get someone en route.
I give them my address and name, and then ask, how fast can they be here? Something is really off.
We have officers nearby. They should be there shortly. Just stay on the phone with me until they arrive, okay?
Okay. Before either of us have a chance to say anything, I feel a tug on my shirt, which almost made me shit my pants. I've been so focused on the phone call and keeping an eye on the bunny man, I didn't hear the kids come downstairs. When I spun around to look at them, the kids peered at me and could see the bunny man, and both promptly let out a blood-curdling scream. This then triggers the bunny man, who begins to bang wildly on the front door again. At the sight of his raging on the front door and 2 terrified kids, I keep the phone in my hand but pull it away from my ear. Wrap the 2 kids up in my arms before quickly rushing them into the den and closing the door behind us. Even through the closed den door, we can still hear the banging. Laura and Ryan are both crying at this point and refusing to let go of my waist. Will someone get here soon? He's banging on the door again, and the kids are awake and scared shitless.
They're only a few minutes out. Can you and the children try to find a safe place to hide?
We're in the den with the door locked. There really isn't a place to hide in here.
Okay. Keep the door locked and sit tight. Officers will be there soon. Can you still hear him outside?
Yes, it's really loud. I'm scared he's gonna break the door down.
Okay. Officers are a minute out. Can you describe the costume this person is wearing?
It's a white old bunny looking costume. It looks really dirty and the eyes are cut out.
Are you sure this is a male?
But before I could respond, the banging at the front door stops. The banging stopped.
The banging stopped?
Yes, it's quiet now.
Okay, just stay where you are. Officers are in your neighborhood. Ma'am, officers have arrived at the scene. Do not exit the room you are in until police announce themselves.
Don't you want me to unlock the door for them? Please don't kick it down. This isn't my house.
Ma'am, officers say the front door was wide open upon arrival. Just stay where you are. Officers will get to you shortly.
But the door was locked. I always keep the door locked. To wrap up this very long story, somehow when the police arrived at the front door, it was wide open. Even though I know it was locked. I had even checked after that second time Bunny Man knocked. But Bunny Man was nowhere to be seen. The police did a search of the house, which was all clear. No one inside except the 3 of us, and they couldn't find him around the outside of the house either. They said they would canvass the area, but I'm not sure if anything came of it. They did leave an officer to wait outside the house until Angela got home. I called her as soon as the police got to us from that room, and I was able to get off the phone with 911. I think they could see how shaken I was. I refused to babysit for anyone for a long time after that night. Maybe a solid year. and when I did start babysitting again, I would jump anytime I heard anything outside after dark. To this day, I don't know if they ever found the bunny man. I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe it was just to scare the shit out of random people. Or maybe it was something worse. But either way, that was by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me while babysitting. Ever. I'll tell you my story, but I need to leave out some identifying details. I was living in a very secluded place. I got a reference from one of my friends who was too busy to babysit for this family, who was vacationing nearby at a house near the ocean. The house was less than a mile from the beach with nothing but sand between us and it. There were only a couple vacation homes and they were all pitch black when we arrived. The dad had picked me up from my house. There was no moon or street lights, so I could not see the ocean, but we were close enough that I could hear it. This would have been creepy enough all by itself. That wasn't even the scary part. So the parents leave. We have popcorn and watch some TV for an hour or so before it's bedtime. The kid is about 3 or 4, I wasn't sure. He didn't talk to me at all, hitting all the creepy horror movie stereotypical checklist points. That was creepy thing number 2. I put him in his travel crib to sleep in and settled down in a chair in the room because I thought maybe he'd be too scared to sleep alone in a strange place with his parents gone. Well, he proceeded to kneel and stare at me through the mesh wall for around 30 minutes. I tried coaxing him to lay down and even offered to tell him a story or two. About this time, the mom calls to check in. I inform her he's not falling asleep, and she says, "Oh, you have to leave him alone in there and close the door. You can leave the light on and just ignore whatever you hear. He'll tire himself out eventually." So I'm like, WTF, but whatever. I tell him goodnight, close the door, and he still continues to just stare at me. I go to sit in the next room when this thumping noise starts. It starts slow, then continues to get louder. So I get up to peek into the room and see what he's doing. I know the mom told me not to worry about it, but I had to see what the hell was going on. I look in. He's banging his head on the side of the crib pretty hard. But again, it's one of those flimsy travel cribs, more like a playpen. So he's not really gonna hurt himself, but he was lifting the whole thing up a few inches off the ground with the force of his head bouncing off of it. As soon as I went to close the door again, he immediately stopped and stared right at me with this blank and creepy face. I quickly closed the door, and the banging started once again and then continued for another 20 to 30 minutes, then stopped. I peek in one last time and he's fast asleep. Butt in the air, face on the mattress. Turned to the side so I knew he could breathe okay. The next 3 hours of complete silence were a bit torturous. I could not wait to leave. It's quite possible this child had some issues, with the lack of speech and his behavior. But to not warn me at all was kind of wrong on the parents' part. It goes without saying. No surprise here that I never sat for them again. Thank God. This happened around 20 years ago, so the details involved are a little bit hazy. I was in middle school. I lived in an upper middle class neighborhood in a little New England town with virtually no crime. I had just started babysitting and had just taken a whole babysitting course at a local hospital. After putting up some flyers, I got my first gig. It was at a house in my neighborhood, about a 5-minute walk from my house. They had an older girl who was maybe 8 or 9 and a young toddler. Their mom was giving me a rundown of their routine, and then gave me a little tour of the house. We went into her son's bedroom, and she said something to the effect of, that's odd, why is his window open? Quickly shut the window and seemed somewhat distracted from that point on. She hurried through the rest of the tour and then told me to go hang out with the kids while she finished getting ready. About 2 minutes later, she hurries in, sort of hustles us out the door and then outside. I'm pretty confused at this point, but being an awkward, shy, middle school age girl, I just go along with it. Once we get into the driveway,
She pulls me aside and tells me she went back to her bedroom after noticing those windows were open and saw that most of her jewelry was missing. Soon after telling me this, about 10 cop cars come flying in, guns drawn, the whole works. The cops told me to leave, so I headed home. Pretty terrified. Turns out the burglar, who had broken in the night before, was still hiding in the son's closet, right next to where we were standing when the mom realized the windows were open. I don't really like to picture or wonder what would have happened had she not noticed that open window and left me there for the night to babysit her 2 kids. Needless to say, that was the beginning and end of my babysitting career. I used to babysit for a family that had 2 boys, one 10 and one 12. They were a lot more easier to care for than you hear about boys those age are. They played a lot outside in the backyard. They even had a full treehouse that they spent a lot of time in. A lot of times when I was over there babysitting, they would spend a lot of the time just playing in that treehouse. There were even times when their parents would let them camp out in that treehouse. Normally just in the summer, but in those instances, I only had to go up and check on them every so often. This took place during a pretty hot summer. The kids were all excited about sleeping out in the treehouse that night, and their mom told me it would be okay, just to check on them ever so often, and I tended to always do this, including after they'd gone to sleep. So I went back and forth several times. The boys were staying up late, reading comics, and just being boys. When I went to check on them around 11 o'clock, they had finally fallen asleep. I turned off the light and went back to the house. On the way back, I paused for just a moment. There's a light on in the second story of the house, and that wasn't unusual on its own, but as I was walking back, I saw the light turn off. This definitely wasn't a case of my eyes playing tricks on me either. I wasn't sure what to do at first, but I took up my cell phone and called 911. And after that, I climbed back into the treehouse, turned on the light quickly, and woke up the boys. I didn't tell them what I'd seen, but only that they would hear police sirens and not to worry about it. Soon the police arrived, and I watched them from the treehouse as they went in. An officer soon came over to the treehouse as well to indicate to us that it was okay to come down. I watched again as cops came out of the house with a man in cuffs. They had found him, hunkered down in the boys' room closet, holding a knife. I don't know if he was waiting for them, and I don't know if he was waiting for me. Maybe he was just there to rob the place. All I know is I'm very thankful that I saw that light go off. I was babysitting for a family that I've been doing this for several years. They always paid me very well and gave me extra money for pizza for dinner and all that. So after a couple of hours after the parents had left, and once the kids had done all of their homework, I went ahead and ordered the pizza. When the pizza guy arrived, it was a different guy than I'd seen before. He was a bit awkward at first, not really seeming to acknowledge that I was there, just kind of giving me this creepy look. After a moment, he looked over at the car and told me he had gotten the pizza wrong. He went back over to his car, grabbed another pizza, and came back to deliver this one. He gave me the pizza, I paid him, and he left. When I opened the pizza, I noticed that I actually had gotten the wrong pizza. I just assumed this guy was new and had made some sort of mistake. I called the pizza parlor to let them know, and they told me that they would send a new one out. About half an hour later, the kids were getting pretty hungry and frustrated. But finally, the pizza came not long after. It was the same guy. He apologized and we exchanged pizzas. He was about to leave before I checked the pizza myself, and once again, it was the wrong pizza. I called the guy back and he apologized, but by now, I was getting irritated. He went back to his car, got another pizza, confirmed that it was the right pizza, and then he left. I was just bugged by this guy, but happy that I finally was able to get the kids fed. Halfway through eating the pizza, the doorbell rang. I went to check on it, and it was that same pizza guy. He told me that I'd overpaid for the pizza, which I know that I haven't. He gave me $10 and I just took it and he left. Thankfully, he didn't come back for the rest of the night, which was great. I put the kids to bed and read until his parents came home. I got into my car to go home.
About 2 hours later, there was a knock at the door. I was still awake because I was studying for a big test. When I answered it, it was the police. Someone had broken into the house I was babysitting for, claiming he was my boyfriend. I had to refute the story and identify who it was. Don't think it comes as any surprise to anyone reading this that it was the pizza guy. He didn't know I was the babysitter and assumed that I lived there. He tried to get in late at night and got caught, claiming, "I'm your daughter's boyfriend." Well, obviously he went to jail, and I have no doubt that he kept screwing up on purpose in order to keep coming back to that house. I'm sorry that family I babysit for had to go through this, but I still watched over their children often.